Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson, and welcome to Construction Project Management Tips, where we help you to manage your projects smarter, faster, and better. Today, we're going to be looking at management and contingency reserves. Those of you that may be studying for your PMP certification, this might be helpful for you, as well as anybody involved in construction projects that's trying to identify risks and how these are actually applied to projects. So this will be a very preliminary introduction to these two key areas. So, contingency reserve versus management reserve. Well, some people don't, they might just intertwine them, that they're the same thing. PMP defines them as two distinct different areas to serve two different purposes. They are definitely both utilized to help companies better manage risk. And on construction projects, believe me, there are a lot of risks that are involved when you run projects. As I said, both really are involved in the management of risk, and we can identify risk in a variety of ways. And I've done different videos, one on VUCA, volatile or volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, four key areas that we deal with in everyday life, but we certainly deal with in projects as well. And we have different types of approaches to projects. When we take a project on, there's what we call the known knowns. These are the things we know, and we know them very well. So we're not too worried about that part of it when we're actually putting together a project and a budget for a project and estimating a project and pursuing a project. We're just making sure that we've done our due diligence on that. Then there's the known unknowns. These are the things we know that we don't know. That when we're doing a project, these things can come up and they can kind of throw a wrench in things for us. So there's known unknowns, and that's a kind of a type of risk, as you'll see, that we kind of associate with contingency reserve. Then there's the unknown unknowns. These are the things that they just hit us, and we don't know how they hit us or why they hit us, but they came out of nowhere and really sort of changed the landscape of the project. And we want to have something there for that in case that does happen. And that's where we get into the management reserve area. We also call unknown unknowns black swan events. Nicholas Taleb sort of famously put that in his book, The Black Swan. These things that come out of nowhere and get us. It doesn't mean that we can have something for every possible eventuality, but we do want to take a very sort of methodical approach to risk on our projects. We can't be doing what Daniel Kahneman would refer to as the planning fallacy, where we take this optimistic view that everything is going to run perfectly well and we're not taking on any risks. So in construction projects in particular, there are a lot of risks that are involved, and these two reserves can be quite helpful for us in dealing with them. The contingency reserve is at a lower level in the costing of a project. I'll show you a triangle coming up where it's kind of showing the levels of how we include costing on our projects. I've done a previous video on work breakdown structure, and that helps to identify the different activities and areas of work. Well, we can actually have contingencies for some of those estimates that we put into place to basically help us to or protect us against certain risks that we've been able to identify. And so it really comes into the risks that we've identified. So going into the pricing of this project, we identified certain possibilities of risks, and we've put in the probabilities of them occurring, and we've allocated a certain amount of money for that. And so we'll get into that in another video, how we look at those allocations and how we identify them and the different methods that can be used and approaches that can be used to best identify them. So it's not to be used for change orders or that sort of thing. Then you'll start taking on, oh, we're not going to make a claim, we'll just take it out of the contingency reserve. That's not what it's for. It's for risks that you have identified. If it's a change order, well, then you should go through the change order protocols and submit the claim, negotiate the claim, get it into a change order, and that's going to change your budget. But contingency reserves are for risks that we've seen. So, in a very simplistic way, I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, probably maybe too simple, but lock purchased, installed, faulty, needs replacing. The extra time involved is 2 hours labor, $90 per hour. Well, you've got something that you've identified, and then you've got to look at probability. So you wouldn't necessarily put that full amount, but if it was a very small project, and it's only going to take 3 or 4 days, that 2 hours is a substantial amount to it. And so you want to have something in there for those types of things that occur, because very often if you didn't on these very small things, you'd always be something would be coming up that you didn't allocate for. You're doing the planning fallacy, thinking things are going to run perfectly well when there's certain risks that are, they have a certain probability that they will occur. A complex issue. Well, you've expected excavation rate of 1,000 cubic meters per day, but it's only 950 cubic meters per day due to machine breakdowns and traffic variations. I better say that was identified as an unknown, a known unknown. So you kind of knew that this could occur. It's the city of Toronto or the city of Chicago, wherever it happens to be, and you have this sort of adjustment, but it's not something that you wanted to price the whole project out at, taking every avenue and thinking that that's going to be the high and 100% because you'd be too high in your price. But you did want to have a contingency in place that would help to mitigate some of that cost if it happens. So it's a known unknown. We expect this is what it's going to go at. This is pretty much what the realistic time frame is. But within this tolerance of risk, we won't be surprised if it goes at this rate. So we're going to allocate a contingency to address some of that. And what is the likelihood of that happening? Is it like 10%, 20%? Then that's going to help you in identify, well, what kind of costs should we put in place from that? You'd also look at your historical data on those types of things as well. And this is where also keeping a track of it as you go through your project and what gets utilized and what doesn't, it does help to build up your understanding of risks and probabilities on your projects over time. So it gives you pretty good feedback on that. And because it's kept as separate items that can be drawn upon, you can document that, which means that you'll have really good data for future projects. And then you can get really sort of detailed with it. Management reserve, as opposed to contingency reserve, that is something that's the unknown unknowns. I've got this picture of a sinkhole here. It's not the one that I had in mind, but there was one in Ottawa where they were putting an LRT through downtown Ottawa, and a giant sinkhole, like in the most prominent location, appeared. And was likely a pipe that burst. There would be, now did the contractor make the pipe burst? Did it burst just because of age? At any rate, it would be good to have a reserve in place for these unknown events. You might be able to utilize insurance, and then you might not have to utilize the reserve, or in the short term you might have to utilize the reserve, and in the long term maybe you could get it back with insurance or prove that it wasn't caused by you. But at any rate, you do have something that's put in there for that kind of event. You didn't know that that kind of event was going to happen, and you didn't apply it. Otherwise that would be under the contingency reserve, where it's a known unknown. But unknown unknowns, it's after the fact. I can easily explain it, I can show it, and this is what happened. So we had something there. Now, a key difference too between a contingency reserve and a management reserve, and PMP sort of outlines this as well. The contingency reserve, the project manager would have in their budget, direct budget for the project that they are managing and controlling. So they could draw on that if they needed to. And they should really only, as I said, be drawing on it for those risk levels. It shouldn't be used for other types of things like the office party or that sort of thing. It should be used for those risks and those risk mitigations. The management reserve is, well, I'm the project manager for this project. There's a construction manager and there's a vice president, and they're looking after a portfolio of projects. More senior management then gets requested for money from the management reserve. So in other words, you're identifying this event, wasn't known, and we're drawing upon that as a result. And so good, you can also keep that money aside and know what it was put aside for. And now that's being drawn upon what was the event. And these unknown unknowns also in future projects, they may have the opportunity to become under the contingency reserve as known unknowns, because maybe you learned something from that. Maybe not. Maybe it's just something you can't predict. But that's what the management reserve is. So it's above the project manager's, let's say, influence or power. They've got to request that from senior management. And again, that's how PMP would identify it. Different companies can operate different ways in the real world with this, but at the end of the day, you need to have something there for these unknown unknowns, and you need to have something there for these known unknowns, and that's where these two reserves come into place. As I mentioned in previous videos, I've talked about work breakdown structure, and that's what you're doing. You're taking the overall project and you're breaking it down into sections like pre-construction, construction, closeout, post-construction. So you've got these different areas that you've identified, and then you've identified costs at the activity level, and then those costs get rolled up to the next level, which we'll look at in the triangle and how that can be associated. Now, contingency costs could be applied at the activity level. They're probably applied at a more higher level and then as maybe a total of what's been identified, but that can be done in different ways. And perhaps that's for another video discussion. But essentially though, that would come under your overall project budget. Now on this being a cost loaded schedule, I would likely still have it separate from this just because I'd like to manage that separate. So this is basically my budget that I'm identifying and I'm monitoring on the project. I may change it based on drawing on some of those contingency reserves. And if something goes beyond that, then it's going to be under the management reserves. And that is, again, above this cost line. So let's take a look at how PMP typically would identify. As I said, you have these different levels, like in your work breakdown structure, activity estimates, work package estimates, control account estimates, project estimates, contingency reserve. So project estimates really, you could look at it in this case without that contingency reserve, or you could include that contingency reserve in there, but you better know how much it is, because otherwise it just gets absorbed and then you don't know that what happened to it. Like, you want to make sure that that's a separate line item that you understand when you're drawing upon it. I don't want to be drawing upon it without knowing that I am. That's what's key with the contingency reserve. Your overall cost baseline, what you as a project manager would manage without having to ask for extra funds, would include your overall roll up of your costs, because these basically roll up, like 4 or 5 activities might roll up into your work package estimates. Your workout package estimates might roll up into your control account estimates. So again, that could be, say, your control account would maybe be these different headings that you have identified here at this level of the work breakdown structure, and here, and then it can roll up to the overall project amount, which would be your cost baseline, and that would then include that contingency reserve. So you would want it, as long as you can manage that effectively, then that's good. The management reserve, that's on the overall project cost budget, right? So if we add these things up and we take a look at it logically, these are the known unknowns. These are the unknown unknowns that we don't know yet. And these are risks that we've identified. We just don't know if they're going to occur. And contingency reserve plus project estimates equals the cost baseline. So this plus this equals the cost baseline, right? All of these, they add up into these. All of these, they add up into these. All of these, they add up into this, right? And management reserve plus cost baseline equals project cost budget. So that's this plus this equals your project cost budget. So your management reserve plus your cost baseline add up to your project cost budget. And above that, we actually have overhead and profit, right? So the company has the head office, all of the things that it needs to run effectively. that is markup, and markup is overhead and profit. But you managing the project are looking at all of the costs that have been allocated for this project, and this is your budget that you're working from. Then of course the project has a markup to cover that overhead and to identify the profit and account for the profit target that the business is going after for that. You definitely don't want to start eating into this stuff, because that basically means you're losing money or you're not making any profit very, very quickly. So this is why we have these reserves. Otherwise, the first time something goes awry, some risk appears, all of a sudden we're eating into overhead. And first thing you eat into is profit. Then once that's gone, then you're eating into overhead. And that's how a company will eventually not be sustainable. So construction is a complex business, and we have a lot of different costings to allocate for. But if you have it built into your systems and you have a way of running things, then you're going to have really good data. And when these things do occur, and they will occur, you've allocated hopefully enough. And that's for other discussions on like, how do we identify the risk and what's a proper percentage? Is it 5% that we're going to put into the contingency reserve and another 5% into the management reserve? Is it 4%? Is it 10%? Part of that goes back to VUCA. How uncertain is this project? What's the level of uncertainty? What's the level of complexity? What's the level of our business's known knowns about this particular project? Is it something, we do this all the time and we've got this down, and any of these sort of contingencies are pretty easy for us to identify and we can mitigate a lot of them and minimize a lot of them? Or is this going into a new sector for us as a construction business, and we better have a little bit higher contingencies as a result, because there's more unknown unknowns that we may have missed that should have been in the known unknown areas. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of that, and it's trying to pull together some of the PM tips of project management and costing and work breakdown structures, cost loading of schedules. So if you enjoyed this video, I hope you subscribe and click notifications, and you'll see new ones that come up. I'm Tom Stephenson, wishing you a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.